All right, let's do this. It's time. So I'll apologize for the other videos on the analytical aspect of writing, mostly because I was feeling really low energy yesterday, and I am also feeling low energy today, but I did a couple jumping jacks just for you so that I would be awake and ready to do this. So with that, let's begin. We've already covered the analytical aspect and its main purpose, what analysis is, where we're trying to pull something apart to understand its pieces, its roles, its relationships to other pieces, and the larger whole or composite. So we've also talked about levels of cognition and how critical thinking might be applied to a process of knowing the facts, processing, interpreting the facts, and then coming up with some sort of evaluative claim. And when you have done all that, you usually want to advocate for it. We also talked about the Iceberg Theory already in those other videos. In the Iceberg Theory, we talked about the basics, the foundation of there's stuff you can see, there's stuff you can't see. You use the stuff you can see to figure out the stuff you can't, because that's always cool. Okay, so with that, let us push forward. As we try and do this thing called critical thinking, or do this thing called analysis, we use a variety of tools and techniques in different contexts. And each one of these tools may feel like you're doing the same thing because you're doing analysis or critical thinking with each of these tools. But each tool is privileged in a different context and helps us get at a different part of the hidden information or the invisible, unseen things as we push through it. And so as you look at these, see them as a variety of tools in your tool belt that you can apply in a variety of contexts to get at a more complex and detailed and nuanced understanding of whatever it is that you're trying to figure out. It doesn't have to be a problem, but a lot of analytical processes are applied as a result of a problem because a problem provides a rhetorical exigency, and so that is why often they'll be in light of some sort of problem. Sometimes, though, the exigencies, I'm just trying to understand something better, and that's okay too. You can use any of these analytical models to work through something that you're just trying to understand better. You're trying to get a picture of how something fits into a larger system, or how a person fits, or how a thing, whatever it is. So let's talk about this. I'll probably end up doing individual videos for each analytical aspect of writing, or each analytical process, each common type of analysis. That's probably the wise thing. So here we go. We're going to start with stakeholder mapping. We do that. So stakeholder mapping, one, it should be noted, it's highly relatable to any content you have about sociology, psychology, anytime you're dealing with specifically the social setting and how people interact with people. But also if you step back and go like political science or history or anything like that, any expertise you have dealing with those things is going to make you better at stakeholder mapping or stakeholder analysis. And so this is a broadly applicable form of mapping. When it comes to like tying to other aspects of writing, rhetorically, it can be a really good, really effective way at pulling apart an audience and figuring out who am I really trying to talk to when I'm trying to figure out who my primary, secondary, or collateral audiences are, that sort of thing. So just as a point of clarification, we should define stakeholder because we're mapping them. A stakeholder is a person or a group of people who has an interest or investment in something. This is not the same as a stockholder who has a financial investment in a company. Though they are financial stakeholders in a company, but a stakeholder is not always a stockholder, even though a stockholder is always a stakeholder. Sorry. If you need to scratch that record and hit reverse a couple seconds, do it. Bust a Missy Elliott. Put the thing down, flip it, and reverse it. Okay, so the point, though, here is that a stakeholder can have a variety of types of investment in whatever you're studying. It could be a person, place, or thing. Could be a topic. Could be a phenomena, a problem, something you're trying to figure out. So a stakeholder... First, stakeholders are people or groups of people. And so that's the primary, for most stakeholder mapping, we're looking at people. There are other types of mapping that will look at other things. And there are some people who are really in the fine-tuned parts of the scholarship, and they'll challenge this idea, this definition of stakeholder. But unless you're getting a master's or a PhD, or you're at that level, you don't have to worry about some of those more advanced versions of what counts as a stakeholder and agency and stuff like that. Though I will talk about agency at some point when we discuss the sociocultural aspect of writing. Stakeholders are people or groups of people. That's what makes this a unique form of analysis. And so they have an investment that may be emotional, it may be social, it may be physical, it may be monetary, it may be intellectual. On some spectrum that you can come up with, people are affected or affecting, they are impacted or impacting this thing that you're trying to understand better. That's what makes them stakeholders. Okay. So who is affected by my topic, situation, problem? Who affects? Who cares about? So they, if they have a care for it, if they have a or some sort of stake in it, that makes them a stakeholder. They can go on your map. Okay. So with that, we can, to help us work through stakeholder models, we can borrow from a way of breaking down society. And so I like to borrow, just to get us moving with big categories. You can use systems of stakeholders based on Louis Althusser's ideological apparati or apparatuses. And we can talk more about that with the sociocultural. But essentially, he gave us a way of breaking down types or parts of society. Now, there's some he doesn't mention, and that's because he's building on other scholarship. If you go look him up, don't freak out that he's considered a Marxist scholar. That doesn't mean he's directly talking about communism. And nowadays it's primarily an analytical tool for understanding society. So don't freak out and think I'm encouraging communism and whatnot. Just, it's an analytical lens. If you do the background research, but that's cool. Suffice to say, when we're dealing with types of people or groups of people, he gave us a bunch of categories. So when he gave us these, ideological apparatuses just means ideologies, from the French word that essentially translates to our the English word worldview. If you break it down, it's like the logic of our ideas or our belief systems, that kind of stuff. And apparatuses is like mechanisms. So it's kind of like social mechanisms for affecting ideas or beliefs. And so these can be starting points as you think about stakeholders in your particular text or topic or issue. And there may be, these are broad categories that you can begin applying. So if we're talking about educational stakeholders, what people are in the educational realm who are impacting or impacted or care about this thing that you're trying to study. And so we could say, okay, education in what standpoint? Are we talking about like public school versus homeschool? Are we talking about college versus high school versus elementary? Are we talking about, what are we talking about? Depending on what makes sense for your context, your topic, the thing you're studying, you decide. These are just, it's a model to start from. It gives you a little bit of a starter kit, so you don't have to just come up with random people groups that affect your project. But you could do that as a form of like a quick bubble map, and that'd be fine. When it comes to family, are we talking like nuclear family, mom, dad, kids? Are we talking about cousins, brothers, uncles? Are we talking about blood relatives, friendships? Like the family apparatus is that more close-knit, so it may include friends. Are we talking legal or governmental, political, like parties, lobbies, trade unions? Are we talking about religious organizations, pastors, preachers, bishops, imams, that sort of thing? Are we talking journalistic media, press, radio, television, people, specific people or people groups, so news anchors? Or when we speak of the cultural apparatus, are we talking about people who write literature, people who are artists, sports ball players, depending on what game it is? Do we mean basketball players affect us in a certain way, or this problem I'm trying to solve? Do we mean coaches? Do we mean trainers? Do we mean academic coaches for college athletes? People who may fall into those categories. Again, these can be starting points. That's one model for doing stakeholder analysis. You don't have to get stuck to that. And we'll talk more about it when we talk about the sociocultural aspect of writing. So continuing on. If to get started, this is a map I like to use. It's just, a lot of people will initially look at this, get confused, and just do a basic bubble map. and start listing any random thing. The only thing that makes stakeholder mapping different than a normal mind map is that you are focusing on people and groups of people. As I say that, how you do that, um, it helps to work with those broad categories closest to the center and work your way out. So here's how it works. In that middle box, you might put the topic, the issue, the problem, the thing that you're trying to look more into. The little legs out, it doesn't have to be 4 like the model on the screen, but it's just however many primary categories you have. And then you start listing, okay, my primary category is people in education, people in the government, stakeholders. Okay, and then as I do that, maybe I work with just those 2 at first. And so people in the government, I might say stakeholders at the state level of government, at the national level of government, at the local level of government. And then I might even name them like the mayors, governors, presidents, senators, and other legislators, legal aides. I could work down. And then I might go beyond the secondary subcategory. I might dig in even further, and I'm going to start naming specific people. So, a few years ago, maybe it was President Obama, maybe it was his vice president. Now it might be President Trump and his vice president or press secretary or whatever it is, or you name it. But you might, as you get into stakeholder analysis, you can get to the level where you are naming specific people, but you want to try and see it as umbrellas down in to a more focused thing. So that's why it works well as an analytical process, because it helps you think first at the big categories, and then you kind of slowly spiraling in and spiraling in and spiraling in until you get to something more specific, and to more specific people and their direct impact on your topic. Have they said anything specific regarding this thing that you're trying to understand? Yeah, now as we look at this, not what I'm looking for. As we look at this, pretend you didn't see that flash forward. Mapping groups as in the form that I showed you with a basic tree diagram or mind mapping diagram, mapping groups in this way is only the first step. It does help us identify the pieces. It does help us identify who is affecting or who is affected by or concerning an issue. However, that previous form of mapping makes everything look very even, very balanced, very equal, egalitarian, to use the French word. So the challenge with that is that each group of stakeholders, if it all looks the same, it might look like they all have the same amount of pull, the same amount of power. But that doesn't allow us to visualize the previous look, the basic mind bubbling map doesn't give us a way to really think about what the balance of power is. And if you want a fancy word for that, for power dynamics, we'll talk about it more with the sociocultural, but it's a fancy $5-10 word called hegemony. And if you say hegemony in a sociology class or history class or political science class, you're going to sound flipping cool. I've asked a sociology professor and they said yes, and if they know what it means, it's even better. So get your cool points where you can. So suffice to say, we need a model when it comes to stakeholder analysis. We need a model that for each group of stakeholders to represent the type of pool or the level of pool in a system that they have. Some stakeholders have more, some stakeholders have less. So how can we map these types of forces? If you look at the goofy little GIF I have here, we've got the big hunk of a dog and the tiny little puppy. If there were 20 puppies, that would be a more intense stakeholder group because they would be working together and balancing out those levels of power. So we can think through. So we need another form of mapping as well. So let's see. Don't judge. I essentially got this. Yes, I did get this from crayonaction.com. So let's look back. A way of mapping stakeholders that reverts back to 3rd grade. No, it's not to scale. Don't get grumpy at me and don't. Yeah, okay, we'll stop there. I've had people challenge me in class and I'm just like, come on, guys. It's representative. That's why it's mapping. So as we look at this, here's an alternate form. And and part of this I did develop with Tonya Ike. So if you know her, she's cool, and she's an amazing teacher, and we've done research projects and stuff. So not to take full credit, but we kind of bounce this back and forth. So the idea is that the center, that whatever your problem is would be that center burning issue, the sun. And so you put that as like the center of your universe, whatever it is. Now, as you look at stakeholder mapping and you try and toss stakeholders put them into different roles, you could maybe in your particular issue, maybe you've got people who are really close to the sun. Maybe they're very passionate, highly emotional, very reactionary. Maybe they're even a little violent, depending on the situation, and they're just burning really hot. So maybe they're Mercury. They're really close to this issue. They've got a lot invested in it, but that also makes them be a little harder to hear from an academic standpoint or intellectual standpoint, because it's hard to get past some of that emotion or that passion, that kind of thing. Maybe there are other stakeholders who maybe they've got a lot of pull, but they're basically big balls of gas, like Jupiter. These could be celebrity figures or even politicians who just aren't knowledgeable, but because they've got a really big voter base, they have a lot more power in this situation. So that's something to be aware of. Maybe there are people trying to be who should be in the conversation that other stakeholders don't even think should be involved. They're like Pluto. They're left out in the cold. They're on the edge of your solar system. They're marginalized. Some people don't even think they're a planet anymore. In the words of Guster Burton, did you hear what they did to Pluto? That's a psych reference in case you didn't get it. It's a fun show. Anyways, other stakeholders might be more life-giving. Maybe they're providing meaningful data, meaningful in a healthy way, in a balanced way. These would be stakeholders that line up with like Earth. And so as you're thinking through the different people involved in your process, just remember stakeholders, just like we learned from physics, anything with any sort of mass has some sort of gravitational pull. Stakeholders, even if they seem like they're only barely involved, they're going to be able to move or affect that system somehow, even if it's in a secondary or tertiary way. So we want to try and figure out who all the players are so we can better address them as writers, or address their concerns or needs as we go to dig into a problem. And again, all of these analytical processes are great for writers and everywhere else. So keep using them even if you don't have to write a full essay on something. Now, the cool thing about doing analyses like this is that as you begin to do it, you suddenly realize, oh, there were even more celestial bodies or stakeholders than I thought there were. And if I had not done this mapping technique, I would not have realized it. So keep in mind that when you analyze things, you discover more things to analyze. As you open up different areas of inquiry, as one might say, different things to question about, different things to figure out, the better you understand something, the more you realize what you didn't understand before. And so that can be really meaningful, and that's why it's important to do more than just a quick spitball or brainstorm. That's why it can be helpful to put some of these things down on paper, even as rough draft process work, to help you figure it out, because as you're doing that, you realize some gap that you missed along the way that wasn't in the back of your mind. Okay, so that's kind of cool. With that, I do have a student example where they use this idea of stakeholders, and I had them do this as a process draft. The student was wanting to deal with the issue of physician-assisted suicide, and this was before she had come to a particular stance on it, but she was trying to figure out, okay, who are the stakeholders and where would I put them in relationship to each other and in relationship to the whole system. She came up with this nice rationale, and so that can be a good example. I'm not going to go into all of it right now, but it's pretty cool. If it helps you, you can look back or pause the video and that sort of thing. With that ends stakeholder analysis, which again has to do with mapping out people or groups of people who have an interest or an investment in whatever it is you're studying. Whatever that topic of your essay is, whatever the burning concern you have is, whatever problem you're trying to solve, you can use stakeholder mapping or stakeholder analysis to figure out who affects or is affected by this thing.